Dennis Nilsen is charged with murdering Kenneth Ockenden, Martin Duffy, William Sutherland, Malcolm Barlow, John Howlett and Stephen Sinclair on various unknown dates between December 1979 and February of this year.
The court heard that the 16 killings followed a pattern. Every victim was a young man, usually without a permanent address, and Nilsen met most of them in pubs. Police said, "Are we talking about one body or two?" Nilsen said, 16. I'll tell you everything.
I think we are all capable of killing someone. Murder and having the intention of killing someone else, maybe not.
Generally speaking, organised serial killers are actually quite social creatures and they're very good at blending in with the community, whereas disorganised killers tend to live on the fringes and struggle to fit in.
I think there's a fascination with serial killers because they demonstrate the worst of the human condition.
It's the need of the psychopath to have control, to have complete control over someone else's life and someone else's behaviour, and the gratification that that gives them.
We know that Dennis Nilsen's father wasn't present as he was growing up, and there's a couple of different effects that can have on a young, impressionable boy to grow up without a father. One thing is a general sense of rejection, so he might feel damaged. He might have this core belief that there's something wrong with me. And the other thing is insecurity and a lack of self-esteem.
So nowadays you have many more monoparental families, and his mother, Betty White, got married with his father, Olav Nilsen, who took the name of Nilsen later on, who was a Norwegian soldier. And he was very often away, and he was during the war. So obviously he didn't have that paternal role, but the person who then took that sort of paternal father figure was then his grandfather, with whom he was very close.
Arguably, it's even worse when a young child has a father who's alive but chooses not to be present, because that child might think that they're in some way flawed, that they're being rejected because of who they are, that it's somehow their fault.
So he was living in a very domineering female household with his grandmother, his mother and his auntie, and he received most of his affection from his grandfather. But in his autobiography, what we also see is that Nilsen disclosed that over the year he could remember some memories, but couldn't really make sense of it because it happened when he was quite young. And he remembers going to the seaside with his grandfather, doing nice things, but he also remembered often going to an old war bunker where his grandfather was taking him, and often giving him what he was saying was some tea from a flask. And drinking that tea was making him very sleepy. And he can remember that his grandfather was then undressing him and was starting to touch his genital and fondling him.
Dennis Nilsen claimed in his autobiography that he was sexually abused by his grandfather. Of course, we don't know whether that's true or not. But if it was true, then it's quite possible that that led to a huge inferiority complex. He would have felt like he was nothing more than an object for his abuser's desire. So that might have internalized this feeling of worthlessness, turning into this rage that eventually he wanted to take out on other people.
For him, there was also some confusion about what is right and what is wrong, because he didn't know that these sexual acts that were perpetrated on him were something that shouldn't be happening. Although he did know that his grandfather often told him that these were secrets, but he didn't necessarily realize what was happening to him until later on, when he was then able to process these events. And that then can lead to some confusion in terms of what is love, what is affection and what is sexual abuse.
Dennis Nilsen was extraordinarily close to his grandfather, but when Dennis was 6, his grandfather died of a heart attack, and his mother took him to see his grandfather's body, and of course his grandfather was immobile, it was a corpse, but his mother told him, it's okay, grandfather's only sleeping. But this image of his dead grandfather really stayed and embedded itself deep inside Dennis Nilsen's psyche, and he carried it into his adulthood. And there's no doubt that these early experiences played a part in Nilsen's, not just his killing, but the way that he did what he did to the corpses after they were dead.
Somewhere in that snapshot in his mind when he was 6, of seeing someone who had such power over him, and yet now completely powerless. There was the genesis of the fantasy that was to come to stalk throughout Dennis Nilsen's life and give him the concept that the only way you get true sexual fulfillment is with a limp, unconscious, or even dead body.
At that age, it is very difficult to understand what death is and the permanency of death, because often you have children playing together, saying, oh, I'm killing you, and the child is falling on the floor, but they always come back. So this is where the children don't really understand, under 5, 6 years old, the permanency of death. So when he was told by his mother that his grandfather had gone to a better place, he was a bit puzzled and wondered, why hasn't he taken with me then? That feeling of loss of his grandfather, he said in his autobiography that love and death fused in him. And that seems to be the sort of start for him of trying to understand his sexuality, trying to understand what is affection, what is love, through obviously the only relationship where he felt that he was cared and loved about. And he had that feeling of emptiness after his grandfather died, and he never really could find that until the moment where he started to kill his victim and was keeping his victim because they wouldn't abandon him because he killed them.
Nilsen was troubled by his own sexuality from quite a young age, and he didn't really know whether he was gay or straight. And so he decided to experiment with his brother and his sister. His sister didn't apparently notice anything, but his brother certainly did.
When he was playing with boys, boys were telling him about their attraction to girls, and then when he was playing with girls, he was then realizing that the girls were talking about their attraction to boys. So he didn't have a group that he could identify and share his feeling for other boys. So the only way for him to have some physical closeness to a boy was with his brother, as they were sharing a bed when they were children. So what he then was starting to do is waiting for his big brother to fall asleep and waiting to hear his breathing being much slower. And when he was sure that his brother was deeply asleep, this is when he started to undress him and then to touch him and just like discover the body of his brother.
Of course, childhood is a time of sexual experimentation, and what sexual predators try and justify their behavior is to say, well, children are always sexualized, and whereas children are obviously explore their sexuality as they grow up and as they enter into their, particularly obviously as they enter into their teenage years, this does not mean in any way, shape or form that they either want or indeed are ready for any kind of sexual contact or intrusion on their lives by a predatory adult.
It's not that unusual for young children to experiment sexually, but it is pretty unusual, warped even, to do it on somebody that's sleeping at the time.
Sexual exploration among children is normal, but sexual predation by adults is not and cannot be condoned.
And anyway, there was certain rivalry between them, and his brother started to describe him in the Scots slang as a hen, a woman, a girl, which didn't sit particularly well in the northeast of Scotland. And these were, we're talking about the 50s, the 1950s. It was not something that was widely accepted. At that point, being gay was still a criminal offence in the United Kingdom. Nilsen knew he wasn't didn't fit in, which is one reason why he decided very early, I think at 14, he started planning to go into the army.
Son asleep, drink over there, me here. What happens? Crash, bang, what? Have a look at, move the cat up there, have a look at that. Right, look at the state of that, whole bloody ceiling falls down, huh? Falls down on me for a start, rips straight across, hits the dog, poor old pooch, budgie goes up, big row, that wakes you up as well.
And there, for the first time, I think, he found himself able to do what he wanted. He trained to be a chef. He was apparently a very good cook.
What are you doing switching the bloody thing on and off for? You never make a cameraman, you know. No, I'm not going to do anything pornographic.
So when he was in the army, this is when he started also to drink and realized that when they were very drunk, some of his army companions would just pass out in drunkenness. And that was sometimes for him the opportunity to start touching them when he was putting them in bed, but also for himself to be very passive and pretending to be unconscious through drink in the hope that he would be touched. He explained that this is really like the start of that duality process that he had. And really when he realized that the sexual pleasure that he could have and the intimacy that he could have would only be through having someone completely unconscious and someone passive.
And there's no doubt that this sense that Nilsen had of anchoring his sexuality in immobility was becoming deeply ingrained in him. And I think his experience of alcohol and the passivity that generated simply exacerbated that.
Beer I cannot stand, I got it for free at the bottle party.
I think it's very likely that Dennis Nilsen felt a degree of shame towards his sexual proclivities. He was attracted towards men, which was completely socially unacceptable at the time, and also towards corpses.
He tried to be straight on a couple of occasions. He memorably hired a prostitute once and found it a very unpleasant experience. He was attracted to men. And then he was posted to Aden, where he, for the first time, I think, truly flowered into his own sexuality.
Some people turn towards alcohol to help take the edge off social anxiety, so they drink on social occasions. And they do this because it actually decreases the degree of the internal concern and the worry, but also it develops a mild buzz, a sense of euphoria, so it's hard to be both slightly euphoric and anxious at the same time.
Alcohol is a very disinhibitory effect. So for people who might feel shy, who might struggle in social interaction, alcohol can help them to feel more confident. And for Nilsen, it seems to have been something that he needed to make contacts with his victims, but also he said in his autobiography that he needed alcohol as a disinhibition for killing the victims, and also for later on when he started to dismember the victim to discard of the bodies. So for him, he needed that to go over any inhibitions that he might have had, because he knew that this was something that was wrong, but he couldn't stop himself.
Chief Inspector Peter Jay read out the statement, which he said was in Nilsen's own handwriting. It was an attempt at self-analysis and his own description of his behaviour in what he called a condition induced by rapid and heavy ingestion of alcohol.
The army was the family that Nilsen didn't really ever have. His mother had another set of children with a second husband. Nilsen was alone, but it gave him a sense of belonging. And it was something that he wanted. And when he left the army, he was demobbed. He didn't leave dishonourably, he wasn't discharged, he decided to leave. And he made an obvious decision, really. He wanted another family. So he decided, he went back briefly to Stricken, the little village they lived in North East Scotland, but that didn't suit him at all. So he joined the Metropolitan Police. And Nilsen became a policeman. Trained well, liked wearing the uniform, was posted at Willesden Green police station in North London.
I can't understand you. I ask you to start filming from the feet slowly up to the head. And you go sit, but sit pan. Bloody hell, don't you ever watch movies? You must see thousands of movies. You must know what it's like. They're training chimpanzees at Cape Canaveral to operate a camera. Anybody can do it.
I don't think he liked the canteen culture of that police station, which was pretty homophobic, which was brutal. And in the end, I think that got to him. And he decided that maybe the Metropolitan Police wasn't for him. He was still clearly gay. He made no secret of it to himself. He may have kept it quiet at Willesden Green Police Station, but that's another issue. And so he leaves the police and gets a job as a clerk in the job centre in Denmark Street in central London, what used to be called Tin Pan Alley. Still there. Getting jobs for unskilled workers. And he would spend his evenings walking around Soho, walking around High Holborn, the local area, often stopping off at pubs. And that was how he developed into the relentless serial killer that he was to become.
The man currently being questioned by police is a 37-year-old civil servant, Andrew Nilsen, known to his colleagues at work as Des. For the past 6 months, he's been working here at the Manpower Services Commission in London's Kentish town. Before that, he'd worked at 2 other branches of the MSC. Today, his employers are saying that Mr. Nilsen is an efficient worker. It seems his contact with the public is relatively minimal. His job is to process applications for the government's employment transfer scheme. Mr. Nilsen's been a civil servant for 6 years, and it seems that before that he worked for a security firm. I understand that he's also a former policeman, having been in the force for about a year in the early 70s. John Underwood, News at 10 in North London.
He managed to hold down a job as a civil servant and also as a police officer. And he was doing all of this whilst committing these heinous crimes in his spare time. So I think that really says a lot about him as a person and his psychology. He's somebody who's quite emotionally cold and distant, and he's able to compartmentalize his horrific violence from his ordinary day-to-day life. He's not somebody that's racked with remorse or guilt, which is actually quite unusual. I think most people would really struggle to live both of those 2 separate lives.
Well, I think like most of the youngsters that come to London, the first thing that they find is that London isn't what it appears to be on television, which are the bright lights of Piccadilly. But really, London is a very sad place.
People tend to be quite surprised when they hear that serial killers might have had a job, like he had a job as a police officer at the Met, and then he was then a civil servant. But if you think about it, we all have different hats, different role in life. We might be a mother or father, then we might be an employee, we might be someone who does a certain sport, and the way that people might describe us in our private or professional life might be slightly different, but we are able to live with all of these different roles and hats. And for him, it was something that he was quite easily navigating with having his professional life very separated from his sexual and personal life, that nobody was really able to realize what was going on behind doors.
It is Scotland Yard's Missing Persons Bureau which has the grim task of trying to pull together all the information on the thousands of people who simply disappear every year. At any one time, they have 600 bodies on their hands with simply no clues as to their identity. In most cases, they're homeless drifters who've lost all contact with their relatives. Some are never identified. The West London Day Centre cares for and feeds 3,000 homeless every week. In recent years, there's been a large increase in the number of young people passing through its doors. They've come to London in search of jobs. Instead, they find themselves penniless and living off the streets. It's a twilight world with few friends.
Nilsen's targets were all young men, certainly from 14 to 19. They were not mature men who were capable of perhaps fighting back or of understanding what he was doing, or of really, he preyed on their vulnerability and on their naivety, on their inexperience. And that's true in the first victim, Stephen Holt, who was 14. He met him in a pub. By this time, Nilsen had gone to live in a flat in Melrose Avenue in Cricklewood, North London. He met him in a local pub. The boy was trying to buy alcohol, but of course wasn't old enough, and the barman realised it. So Nilsen offered to buy it for him and plied him with alcohol, and then took him back to Melrose Avenue flat, where he proceeded to get him extremely drunk. Nilsen knew that he had to have this lifeless body. So he strangled him. And just to make sure he's dead, he drowned him. But he kept the body. He kept the body for about 8 months. He used to put it under the floorboards and then get it out, this young man, have sex with it. As I say, perhaps not penetrative, and then put it back. Like a friend, they would listen to music together. I know it may sound bizarre, but this is a fully grown man who's working as a clerk in a job centre, who goes home in the evening to sit with a dead body of a boy he's killed.
Killers generally tend to target one particular socio-demographic group, and that can be because they've got hatred against that group for whatever reason. Could be related to their own earlier experiences, or it could be simply to decrease the risk. So, for example, it's easier for men to attack younger or more frail individuals. Dennis Nilsen targeted young homosexual men. That could have been simply because he was sexually attracted to them, or it could be a bit more deeper than that. It could be due to internalising his own shame and embarrassment about his own sexuality, so he projects this onto his victim.
Ephebophilia is what is called a chronophilia. So that is where people are attracted to a sort of age range, but it's not really an age range, it's more the characteristics associated with an age range. So ephebophilia is corresponds to the age range of around 15 to 19 years old, more like the late teens, and this is the types of boys that Nilsen was particularly attracted to. The chronophilia that we most often have heard of is pedophilia, which is the attraction, the sexual attraction to children and prepubescent, where the body hasn't developed yet. So for Nilsen, he needed the body to have developed, but not have the body hair, which is something that he seems to be quite attracted to.
I think Nilsen was a man who stalked victims by night in a patch he knew very well, areas that he'd been to as a policeman, as a night guard. He loved the sordid, seamy life. He used to observe it. He's a voyeur of the underworld, if you like. And I think over the years, he grew so much a part of it that he wanted something more.
So, of course, I mean, it's common among serial killers for there to be a sexual component, and for that sexual component to be perverse. And the great psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud came up with the idea of polymorphous perversity to describe sexual desires, which most people would classify as pathological or abnormal. And of course, necrophilia and the desire to have sex and to have sexual gratification on a dead body, of course, comes under that category.
Necrophilia is sexual attraction or even sexual activity with corpses. One of the biggest motivations for necrophilia is simply to have sexual relations with a non-resisting and a non-rejecting partner. And I think we see that in Nilsen's pattern of behaviour, the very fact that he would ply his victims with drugs and alcohol to make them sedated. Another motivation is simply for comfort and to decrease the feeling of isolation.
So necrophilia is not common. It's difficult to really assess the prevalence of it, the rate of it, but it is something that is quite uncommon. This is considered as a paraphilia, which is a sexual deviation.
There are, of course, a number of other high-profile serial killers who engaged in necrophilia, like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy.
They've often deliberately cut all links with the past, and this makes them an easy target for exploitation by criminals or conmen. Now there's the increasing threat of violence, and this worries Nick Fenton, who runs the Centrepoint Refuge for homeless youngsters.
I think that that's probably one of the prices that some people will have to pay if they can't get themselves sorted out pretty fast when they come down to London. It's an increasingly violent place, and we are most concerned, particularly for young people.
Eventually, after several months, Nilsen knew he had to get rid of Stephen's body. By this time, it was decomposing pretty badly. And so he decided to burn it in the back garden of Melrose Avenue. It was not a very large back garden, on a sort of bonfire. But to conceal the smell of burning flesh, he put a car tyre on the bonfire. Well, the neighbours thought it was a pretty noxious fire, but they didn't realise that Nilsen was actually burning a body of a man he'd killed, a boy he'd killed.
You're a big nincompoop. Oi, over here. Over here? Over here, stand up.
How long do you think it'd take me to dig the garden?
Don't stand there with your hand on your hip, feel like a big poop.
And that was become the pattern of Nilsen's killings. He would search out vulnerable, sometimes homeless, men and boys living on the street. He would offer them meals. He said, come back to my house and I'll feed you. I'll give you something to drink and it'll be fine. And he would do it on a regular and relentless basis.
A lonely man who spent many solitary hours gazing at Karl Marx's grave and who bored his workmates with interminable chatter, Dennis Nilsen craved company. He found it in the pubs of North London, the Black Cap by Camden Town Tube Station, the Golden Lion in the heart of Soho, the Salisbury in the West End. It was in these pubs that Nilsen met his victims. Carl Stotter met Nilsen at the Black Cap, where he agreed to go back to Nilsen's flat.
I fell asleep and I woke up and he was strangling me. And I passed out after sort of thinking. I thought I'd got caught up in the sleeping bag which he had warned me about, and I thought he was helping me out, but he wasn't. And anyway, I passed out from that, and I remember vaguely hearing water running and being carried, and I felt very cold, and I realised I was in the bath and he was trying to drown me.
Nilsen had developed over the year a very rigid sexual script. Something that he said was sort of a very ritualistic, where he liked to do everything in the same sequence to reach that sort of sexual fulfillment. So he would try to strangle his victim, sometimes also drown his victim if it hadn't worked directly in terms of the strangulation. And then what then tended to happen is that he would clean up the body. And sometimes he would carry the body on his shoulder, and that was something that he found really sexually appealing.
And one of the things that's fascinating about Dennis Nilsen is his complete obsession with an extraordinary painting by the artist Theodore Géricault, and it was painted in 1816. It's an enormous painting. It's over 4 meters high and more than 7 meters long. The figures in the painting are life-size, and the painting is called The Raft of the Medusa. And the Medusa was a Royal Navy frigate, a French Royal Navy frigate that capsized, I think it was in 1813, and about 150 people survived the capsizing of the frigate and ended up on this raft. And they were on the raft for 13 days, during which there was an orgy of murder and cannibalism. And the Raft of the Medusa shows the few survivors surrounded by dead and decaying bodies, looking into the horizon, waving at a tiny ship in the distance to come and rescue them. It's an extraordinary work of art, but what's interesting is what Géricault himself went through when he was painting it. Géricault would go to morgues to study dead bodies. He would look at the dying, he would study the dying. He even took the limbs of the dead into his studio so he could watch them decay, so he could make sure what he was representing was accurate. And at one point, he took a severed head from a lunatic asylum and kept it in his studio. So even Géricault got drawn into the horror of what he was depicting. But for Dennis Nilsen, looking at this painting, these immobile, these dead, naked, immobile bodies, the horror of murder and cannibalism, it became an obsession for him and mirrored what was to become his own stamp, if you want, as a necrophiliac and as a serial killer.
Ready, Des?
Yeah, okay, come on a minute. I got to sign on.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna sign on today. I'll sign on again.
Where's that bloody dog? Been chewing my slippers again.
Here it is. Chewing your slippers, I give it.
I'll wring its bloody neck till I catch it again.
Dennis Nilsen's victims reported that he would sometimes strangle them until they were unconscious and then have sex with them while they were asleep. And if they woke up, he would just try and convince them that it was all a nightmare. I don't think this is as sophisticated as manipulation or gaslighting. I think he's just making an excuse at the time.
There was a ritualistic component to Dennis Nilsen's behaviour. He would strangle his victims, then if they weren't dead, he would drown them. When they were dead, he would bathe them, clothe them. He might even apply makeup to them. He would masturbate over them. He would cohabit with them because they, in effect, became his macabre partners. They became the people who he compulsively invited into his world, to share his world in the way perhaps no normal person, no alive person could possibly share. To anybody looking from the outside, the way that Nilsen treated these people when they were dead was extraordinarily abusive for him. It was just a means, perhaps, across this abyss of emotional darkness in which he lived, of crossing that bridge and finding some kind of contact with something that he felt he would get something back from.
I think, generally speaking, most people have little control over our sexual urges or what we're attracted to. But crucially, we do have control over our own behaviour. We know right from wrong, and we know what not to do to fulfil those sexual urges if those are criminal acts.
Mr. Lawrence repeated details of some of the evidence, the way Nilsen disposed of the bodies, living with them under the floorboards for months at a time, putting people's entrails in the garden for the neighbours' cats and dogs, boiling severed heads in a cooking pot. What stronger indication could you have of just how substantially the mind of this man is impaired, he said. The trial continues. Anne Lucas, News at 1 at the Old Bailey.
Dennis Andrew Nilsen was born on the 23rd of November 1945 in Fraserburgh, Scotland. He spent the early years of his life in this house. According to his mother, he was a quiet boy. Little, if anything, marked him out from the ordinary. Nilsen went to school in Fraserburgh, but during his school days he never knew his father, who walked out on the family while Dennis was still very young. At the time of his arrest, Dennis Nilsen hadn't seen his mother for 10 years.
How do you think Dennis was able to become involved in this kind of problem and then be able to live from day to day?
Well, that's the bit I don't understand. I just don't understand how this could go on and nobody knowing anything. I mean, I don't know any but these 10 years of his life. And I can't see what was happening to him. Something must have happened to him, because it's not my Dennis that's doing it. Not the boy I knew that's doing these things.
Bloody finger, you great pillar.
He stayed at Melrose Avenue in Cricklewood, killing relentlessly, without anybody noticing. In fact, he got promotion at work. He became an executive officer and eventually moved to another job centre in Kentish Town. He was bland, nondescript. You wouldn't notice him particularly in the street. He wasn't flashy, had quite a quiet little Scots voice. But he was quite skillful, and he took great care to pick the victims. And indeed, he probably would have gone on in Cricklewood had the landlord not decided that he wanted to do the house up. And he offered Nilsen £1,000 to leave. Nilsen wasn't particularly keen to go, but mind you, he hadn't left any particular signs. I mean, he was quite careful. When he burnt the bodies, he would rake through the embers to see if everything had gone. And sometimes there wouldn't be, or there'd be bits, bones and little bits. And he would tidy those up and they would be got rid of. So it wasn't as if he was leaving any evidence of he'd done anything wrong. As far as anybody was concerned, he was a perfectly respectable civil servant who worked at a job centre in Kentish Town. So he moved flat. He moved to Cranley Gardens in Muswell Hill, North London, not far from Highgate Woods. And he got the top floor flat at number 29 Cranley Gardens.
The house is in a prestigious area of North London, though it doesn't match the immaculate suburban charm of its neighbours. Dennis Nilsen paid £100 a month rent for a two-room flat on the top floor. 3 of his victims were killed here, and police arrested Nilsen after the drains became blocked with pieces of human flesh. As the horrific details emerged, the owner of the house decided to sell.
One of the factors that people believe is foundational to psychopathic serial killers is that the motive is sexual. In some senses that Dennis Nilsen, of course, used to masturbate over the dead bodies of his victims.
Now, there was a disadvantage to that top floor flat for Nilsen in that he didn't have a garden. What was he to do with the bodies? Resourceful. Nilsen traps in the end another 3 young men and takes them back to Cranley Gardens and goes through the same ritual of strangling, drowning, keeping the body as a trophy. But he can't carry dead bodies down 3 flights of stairs in a suburb of London. He's got to do something with those bodies. So he begins to dismember them. And in particular, keeping the heads. He famously boiled the heads of 3 of those victims in Muswell Hill. And he would flush other parts of the anatomy down the loo, down the lavatory. And it was that in the end brought Nilsen to justice. By now he's in his 30s. He's killed probably a dozen people in Cricklewood. He's in Cranley Gardens, and the other residents of the house begin to complain that the drains are blocked.
The cadets arrived 2 by 2, almost parade ground style, straight from the police training centre at Hendon. They're 17 years old, mostly boys, though there were some girls, and they set to work straight away on their hands and knees, scrabbling away at the surface soil on the wasteland behind the house and clearing the brush with rods. After an hour they were so cold their instructor ordered exercises, but they did make some finds.
We are continuing the search of the rear garden, as I've already told you over the past few days, but this morning we're also, in addition, dealing with what I call the waste ground at the back of these premises you'll see behind me.
So they send for a dino rod engineer, a drain engineer, who memorably goes to the drains and discovers that they're full of fleshy material. And he's not quite certain about what's going on here, because you don't expect to find what looks like human flesh. Anyway, he persists in the investigation and begins to find human bones. And at that point, he calls the police. One of the most memorable moments of the whole case of Dennis Nilsen is when the detective arrives at his front door for the first time on that top floor flat in Cranley Gardens and knocks on the door. And Nilsen opens it, and the detective says, "We've come about the drains, Mr. Nilsen." Nilsen then lets them into the flat, and they discover bits of bodies and the heads in a cooking pot on the stove, and realise they're dealing with something quite extraordinary.
We have found considerable items of bone this morning and this afternoon, and we will continue with the search tomorrow.
You can speak to Becker from? Not today, no.
Is it Mr. Barr with you, sir?
Judah.
I doubt whether I...
Try and get you all back.
Yeah, no problem.
It appears as though the bodies have been burnt in the back garden before burial.
There's a possibility.
Today, as every day, the calls have continued to come in.
Help your door? You have a problem with a missing son. Oh dear.
I guess there are some people who are imagining that their relative is somehow or other linked with this unfortunate situation, and this is putting terror into them, as you can imagine. So a lot of people have been ringing up saying, is it possible that this could be my family, my relative?
The 37-year-old accused was taken to Highgate Magistrates Court in police custody 2 hours before he was due to appear. He'd been charged yesterday evening after questioning during the day. He was dressed in an open-necked shirt and wore spectacles. Reporting restrictions were not lifted.
It was precisely 10 o'clock when Dennis Andrew Nilsen was led into the dock to face the bench of 3 magistrates. The charge, a single charge of murdering Stephen Neil Sinclair, was read over to him. There were objections to bail and no application was made, and he was remanded in police custody until Wednesday the 16th of February. At just 1 minute past 10, he was taken down to be driven away at some speed in a police van.
And as Nilsen's taken down into the police car, the senior detective turns to him and says, how many have you killed? Because the police know that there must be at least 3. And Nilsen says quite blandly, 15 or 16. And begins to explain. In the end, he's only charged with 7 murders because those were the only 7 that could be identified. But there's no question that Nilsen killed many more. And is, of course, convicted.
In summing up the case for the prosecution, Mr. Alan Green said that Nilsen relished enormously the power he was exercising over life and death. He knew perfectly well that what he was doing was wicked and against the law. He went on doing it, and did it with considerable deliberation, not impetuously, said Mr. Green. To counter the defence argument that Nilsen suffered from diminished responsibility at the time of the killings, the prosecution said, Nilsen's sense of right and wrong were not impaired. He knew perfectly well that what he was doing was among the gravest of crimes. In summing up the defence case, Mr. Ivan Lawrence QC told the jury they were sitting in the most famous court in the land. This court has heard some horrific cases, he said, but I doubt whether it has heard such a catalogue of dreadful killings. Does not common sense cry out, he must be out of his mind?
Dennis Nilsen spared Karl Stotter, but at least 15 people weren't so lucky. They paid the ultimate price for Dennis Nilsen's hospitality. He killed them, he chopped up their bodies, and he then burned, boiled, or buried the pieces. But Nilsen's reign of carnage was coming to an end. In February of this year, a dino rod man discovered some human remains in a manhole near Nilsen's last home in North London.
Do you still feel in your mind, in your heart, that Dennis is still very much your son?
Yes, he's always my son. And that's why I want him to know that we're all concerned about him. And I just hope he'll get some help to cope with the situation he's in.